welcome everybody. This is our Housing Crunch panel, and welcome to day 2 of the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Texas Policy Summit. I think these get better and better every year. Very excited to tackle this issue today along with a panel of absolute experts, most of whom I've had an opportunity to work with, and one who I look forward very much to working with in the next legislative session to achieve good policy. For those of you who have not had an opportunity to meet, I'm James Quintero. I do our local government work at the foundation. You'll mostly find me throwing stones on taxes, debt, and more and more so housing regulation. So I've had a tremendous joy working to rein in state and local government overregulation of the housing market in an effort to create a more affordable environment. And in pursuit of this, I was in committee last session. I'll share a boring committee story very quickly. And it was I believe it was the Senate Committee on Local Government. We were seeking to advance several different measures during that particular season. And one of the most surprising statistics that was brought to my attention was the fact that, and this is according to the National Association of Realtors, the median age for the first-time home buyer is now in the 40s. And that kind of just grabbed my attention and has yet to let go, because when I think about my own personal circumstance, my wife and I are blessed with 5 beautiful children, all of whom I hope to one day get out of my house. And unless we fix this issue, they will never leave. And so to help me kind of investigate the problem and the solutions to this issue, I've brought along, again, 3 fantastic minds who I can't say enough about. And I won't bore you with their bios, but just trust me, they are long, extensive, and impressive. And but very quickly, to my immediate left is Nicole Nosek, who leads the Texans for Reasonable Solutions group, who has been an invaluable resource. Nicole, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here, especially our legislator here was responsible for literally, I think, over 50% of the major housing wins this past session. So talk about someone who's willing to charge the hill on property rights and affordability. I'm really honored to be here with all of you guys. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Of course, to her left, we have Chairman Hughes, who needs no introduction. He's been a fantastic champion for liberty. Thank you, Chairman, for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you. Thankful for you, Nicole.
And then to Chairman Hughes' left, we have Ron Miller with the Amherst Inc., who brings a wealth of knowledge and experience. Ron, thank you for sharing your time and your energy with us.
Glad to be here, and just want to say thank you to Brian also. Senator Hughes, if you look around the country, we've led the way in a lot of different areas, and we've led it in housing, and it's a tribute to you and Nicole on a local level, which a lot of times doesn't earn many of the headlines. But if we're gonna change regulation in a big way, it comes down to the local level, and Nicole has done an unbelievable job based on what I've read and heard.
It's fantastic. So before we delve into all the various policy prescriptions and policy proposals, I want to see if we can define the problem a bit, right? I didn't want to throw a bunch of numbers and statistics at you guys. I'll let them do that. Can anyone speak to the nature of the problem as it exists, either in Texas or nationally, and what that means for the younger demographic?
Can you lead off, Nicole, based on your experience, how you get into this?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So in some ways, I'm not an expert like Ron here, the chairman, but I think in a unique way, I'm probably the biggest expert because I've seen how bad it can really get. You know, I lived in San Francisco Bay Area. I was making just below $50,000. Went to a very good school, was working as a paralegal at a law firm, working about 45, 50 hours a week. And despite making that salary, all I could afford was a 1 room in a 3-bedroom apartment where there was a little family and a baby living in the second room. Third room was a tech professional. We all shared the same bathroom. It was a little bit gross. But point being is in San Francisco, you know, I kind of hit the lottery by finding this cheap apartment where I was paying about $1,300 a month. And after you pay taxes, groceries, I barely ate out. I felt lucky if I consistently had $1,000 left in my bank account. And I thought, this is so far away from the American dream. Moved to Austin in 2019, and I looked around. I'm now in a fortunate spot, but I looked around and I saw some of that same NIMBYism. Let's just regulate the heck out of anybody who wants to have a bit of the homeownership dream, or even have cheap rents or reasonable rents. And so that's what led me to really tackle the land use issues. And thank God we've had really amazing legislators like the chairman here who have helped bring major wins that we're already seeing thousands of homes being built because of these laws.
Chairman, I know you were, you led the charge in many regards last session to advance a series of different measures. Was that motivated by an affordability crisis that you observed in your district, or was that motivated by kind of statewide concern?
So before we got to know Nicole and Luke and learn about her experience, you know, before it was personal to us knowing them, nobody has to raise your hand. How many of us used to make jokes about San Francisco, right? I mean, if you were middle class, maybe upper middle class, maybe you can own a home someday. But other than that, forget it. Don't even plan on it. And that was such an outlier, such an anomaly. We'd never dreamed that that was coming to a neighborhood near you. And so, yes, we saw this coming. And so, really going back a few sessions, we recognized that one of the drivers to cost of homes is regulation. It's pretty much at the local level. And so we began in a long train of bills to limit what local governments can do. You know, we're all for local control until we're not, right? Until a city like, and it's so much fun to beat up on Austin, but doggone it, Austin's doing great stuff on housing these days. So we'll beat them up on other things, but Austin's doing wonderful things on housing, on supply, on affordability. Some cities are not. And so we passed the shot clock bill back in 2017 that says the city can't mess you around on issuing your building permit. Some cities found ways around that. We've continued to go after those. In general, policies that take land out of production. It's supply and demand, right? The Lord isn't making any new land anytime soon. He will in a future date, and we don't know that exact date. But until then, we have what He's given us. There's not any new supply coming online as far as the dirt goes. And when we have policies that make it difficult or impossible to build or more expensive, we price people out of the market. And we cannot be the first generation that says to the next, you may not have it better than your parents did. That's just been the assumption, right? In America, I know, no matter the color of my skin, no matter where I'm from, no matter whether I've tried and failed, no matter what my parents did, if I work hard and I play by the rules and I trust the Lord, I can succeed and I can lift people up when I do that. It's always been that way, and we refuse to accept that that's changing. We're not going to let that change. And so home ownership, that cornerstone of the American dream, yes, it's got a certain romance to it. It's also very practical. And so we cannot let that dream get out of reach for Texans or for Americans. So, and when Nicole came along with her experience and data and resources to really push this, then the effort has been supercharged in Texas. And really, Texas really is leading the way. That does happen a lot, and we're thankful for that. But yes, it's a real challenge. And we talk about housing affordability, affordable housing. Those terms go all over the place. But I appreciate something Nicole said. A lot of different housing settings. When I was a kid, I lived with my mother and grandmother in a duplex. They rented half the duplex, and we were thankful for that. There's a place for rental property. I know that we do a lot of that on the panel. There's a place for rental property, but let's not forget. Our goal is home ownership. Amen. Rental is a great option, and we believe in the free market and choices, and everyone's not going to own a home, but let's make that the default. Let's make it where home ownership is not just a dream, but a reality for Texans.
I think it's well said, Chairman. Ron, I want to go to you, but I want to throw a little data at you, just a little bit. You know, as I was kind of preparing for this panel, one of the statistics that caught my mind is that the Census Bureau has some new figures out that suggest 29% of Texas homeowners with a mortgage spent more than 30% of their income on housing. And in a very similar vein, more than half of the state's 4.1 million renters are considered cost burden. And I wonder if you might offer up some observations or guesses as to why the situation seems to be trending in a poor direction.
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that lead to that. The first one, and it's a little bit what Senator Hughes said, it's supply and demand. On real estate, right? In real estate, it doesn't matter what sector you're talking about. It's a supply and demand situation. Today in the state of Texas, we're short 300 to 325,000 homes. Okay? Now think about, okay, that there's 1,100 people moving to this state every day. It's 400,000 people a year. So your housing problem is not going away at all unless we are aggressive with fixing it. And the core of the problem is supply, number one. Number two, access to credit, right? And I agree with Senator Hughes, but it's important for people to understand. I mean, we're both baby boomers, right? The largest.
I'm about 3 years out, but close enough. That's
Okay. I'm just trying to. I can't be up here by myself. Yeah. No, but seriously, you know, let's try this one.
I just look like
How many millennial kids do you have? I have 2.
I have none.
Okay. See, he is a lot younger. No, but what's the largest cohort generation in our population? It's millennials. Okay? And there's a lot of focus on us baby boomers, right? Because we were the largest cohort of population until the millennials came along. I have 2 of them. And their mindset, right, and their history is a lot different than ours. And so the housing solution, right, is going to have to adjust, right, just like everything else, to the needs of that population. And so access to credit, right? They wait longer to get married. They wait longer to have kids, okay? They have more debt. Like, this is all factual. And so we have to come up with a way. And again, it has to be controlled, but like, they've got to have access to credit that they don't have today. And then you can look at all the demographics, you can look at all the state, they're transitional. So they're much more likely to rent than own. Now that may change, but it's going to change just like the rest of their life when they get older. So it's important to understand where our population and where your constituents are going to be 10 years from now. And it's going to be a lot about the millennials based on just pure demographics. And then thirdly, and it's been mentioned, and again, Texas has led the nation. We own 45,000 homes across the country, 19 states, 32 markets. And I can tell you that there's been nobody in the last 2 years, the 89th legislature, has done more than anybody in this country that I'm aware of. And so that is super important, that regulation, okay? There's a lot of conversation at federal level. We've made a ton of progress at the state level, but I'll go back to Nicole's efforts. Again, like all the zoning laws, right, where the rubber meets the road is locally. And we do not have enough people. You don't make national headlines, right, when you're changing zoning laws locally. And that's the only thing that matters. Yes, our federal government can provide incentives, right, as can state, but like, it all happens at the local level. And so we need to grow that aspect to change that housing supply.
And I want to just quickly add on to something Ron said. You know, population decline is a real issue here. A lot of my friends, people I went to college with, high school, they're not having kids. And there's a lot of data to show the lack of home ownership for younger people is a huge factor in people not feeling comfortable having a family. There was a study that actually looked at Austin a few years ago, and every 10% increase in rent prices, there is a 3% decline in births. Because why the heck would you want to have kids if there's not even a room to put them in? Or if over 50% of your income is going to your rent, where's the extra money for daycare? Where's the extra money to get a little bit of a help with a babysitter if you want to go out with your husband when you're a young person? So the data is there. If we care about families, if we care about America continuing to have families, we will figure out how to make room for young people to own homes.
And Nicole, well said. Well said. Yeah, go ahead and clap. I'm sorry, I interrupted the applause. Sorry, you're right. And let me stress that. We talk about data respectfully. We talk about millennials that aren't buying as many houses. Maybe there's a reason they're not buying as many houses. Maybe they would like to. And you're right about access to credit. My goodness, after the subprime mortgage fiasco, the Feds tightened up the rules, and it's harder now. You got folks who are paying you guys $2,500 a month in rent, but they can't get a mortgage. It's not your fault. You'd give them a mortgage, but the Feds won't let them have a mortgage. Now, even now, as we speak, there's a rulemaking in process at the federal level to loosen up some of those rules. Not too much, but to loosen those rules up. Let's just be clear. We're market people. We believe in free markets. We also believe that these free market principles help people and lift people up. We do not want a generation of people in this country that are never going to be able to own their home. We want an ownership society, don't we? But we believe in free markets because they lift people up, because there's more. We make more supply for everyone, and everybody does better when everybody does better. And if our message to these next generation, if our message is, yeah, you went to college like we told you to, and you took all those student loans we threw at you, and you got a good job, I'm sorry you can't pay for your groceries, and you're never going to be able to own a house. By the way, your rent's going up. I don't blame them for saying they prefer socialism. Do you? We've got some work to do. We're for capitalism and free markets, and it's not this slavish devotion to these concepts. It's application of these principles in the real world that's going to bless people and lift people up. Because if we don't, we not only have a moral obligation to help them own homes, but if we like having Republicans in control of the government in Texas and America, we better do something about this, because if we don't have answers, if we don't have a way to help them and improve their quality of life through free market principles, they're not going to vote for us. And it could be a lot worse than that. If we have a country full of people that don't own anything, that don't have a stake in this system, I'll just be very direct. That's a country that is ripe for radical change. For radical change, it would be really bad for them and for us and for future generations. We've got work to do.
Well said.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Chairman. You know, one of the interesting differences in this space has been the various responses observed from the federal policymaking sphere as compared to the state policymaking sphere, as compared to the local policymaking sphere. And I wonder if we could just expand on this just a little bit, because of course, Nicole, you led an amazing coalition last session that helped advance a lot of different bills. I think the common thread that ran throughout was get government out of the way and allow market forces to work. Is it fair to say that that's kind of a broad characterization of the state's most recent efforts on housing?
I think that that's very accurate. And, you know, I think that the state interaction with the locality was super key to a lot of the success. And I'm seeing more localities, especially since, you know, our efforts started since 2023. And there had been, a lot of good groundwork and a lot of great housing advocates and legislators advocating for this stuff before us. But what I noticed was after 2023, when there was one major housing bill that we prioritized that was passed, got 2 votes away from Senator Hughes' ADU bill passing on the House floor. But point being is, after that session, there were at least 3 cities that started revisiting, how do we allow more product types? How do we allow the free market to allow us to accommodate different kinds of residents within our communities? And so that interplay between state action and localities action is super important. And I'll give you one example. Senator Betancourt carried a minimum lot size bill, got through the Senate. It was probably about 100 bills away before the House deadline. I want to pretend it was a time problem, but it was probably intentionally 100 bills away on the House floor. But once that bill died, people saw how close it got, because it got quite far for such a big, impactful bill. There were folks in Austin City Hall who were saying, this bill is going to come back next session. Do we want to do it our way, or do we want to do it the state's way? And so sure enough, there was a huge effort to get minimum lot size passed in Austin. There was actually some data that came out by the American Enterprise Institute as well as City of Austin that showed, in fact, all of those homes that were built on smaller lots, or those homes that were, another bill allowed 3 units per lot, a basic property rights issue. People can do what they want with their property. They could have put their mother-in-law back there. They could have put a kid with disabilities back there that they have. And what they showed was actually on par, all of those new units that were built were below market rate. So when you allow the market to accommodate, what you'll find is that people that are in middle income brackets, or people that are struggling, students that have recently graduated, maybe a single mom, that the market will accommodate to them if we don't have barriers that stop them from doing that. And that's a huge undertaking that I think both Texas and specific cities have sort of taken to heart. Now, there's a few cities that have resisted this, and our group is exploring litigation and partnering with certain plaintiffs on this issue. But other cities, and we've seen this with Dallas, and I feel a little silly explaining the bill that Senator Hughes passed, SB 840. There's over 3,000 units that have come on board because of SB 840's impact. And so this is a bill that basically anywhere where there's commercial land, so think about where there's Costco, where there's a dilapidated vacant office space building because people are oftentimes working from home now. You could build either row homes, so townhomes, or you could build apartments up to 5 stories. So 75% of Texans support that policy. It's out of people's neighborhoods. And oftentimes this is land that is being underutilized, and you've got maybe a single mom, or you've got a family or a recent college grad who wants a place to live. They don't want to drive an hour and a half to and from work. This is the perfect opportunity, and we've seen that within 6 months this has been utilized from the research we've done so far, over 3,000 units just because of that law that Senator Hughes passed.
Well, amen. And it's a law that Senator Hughes passed because Nicole Nosek brought the concept to him. It was her idea. We're so thankful. So he's talking about, I know you all understand these concepts well, but talking about lot sizes, right? So I wish we could all have a 5,000 square foot house on a 1 acre lot like Representative Alders does, but some of us won't be able to afford that. And I want everybody to be able to, but maybe not right away. And so many cities that said, oh, this is all we want. You have to have a really big lot and a really big house. And that's really cool, but it's kind of like the city telling you, okay, you can drive a Mercedes-Benz or you can walk. People need choices. People need options. Folks may want a smaller house starting out, or may want a smaller house for the whole time. They may not want all that land, all that house. And so, yes, that minimum lot size bill is telling cities, no, this is about property rights. If you want to build on a smaller lot, that's your business. It's your property. And many cities are so, well, they feel very strongly about their ability to plan. They do a little better. Some of them do a little better than those planners they had in the Soviet Union back in the 80s. Some don't. But the point is, neither system works all that well because free markets and free people making decisions work better. And so Senate Bill 840 that Nicole is talking about, it really makes sense because before that bill, let's say there's that high-rise office building not being used, or that strip center sitting vacant. And so those places are zoned commercial, or they're zoned retail or commercial. They're just sitting there. And say you wanted to build some houses there, or maybe convert that high-rise building into condos. Well, to do that, you have to go to the city and ask for rezoning, which is a long, arduous, expensive process, which may not even work. So under Senate Bill 840, if that building is already zoned as commercial or as retail, you can build residential there without asking the city's permission. And again, it's opened up thousands of housing units, and it's encouraging to see some cities have embraced it, have worked with us. Some are digging in their heels and saying they don't want it. And so, that's what the courthouse is for. When folks don't follow the law, that may come. We'll also be back in January for more legislation. But that's right. If we can free up more choices for people, more opportunities, that's going to be more supply, and that means the prices come down. And that's the goal.
And Chairman, not to dwell on the lot size reform too much, but if I understand correctly, one of the motivations behind getting that bill passed was that when you consider what goes with the inputs into the cost of a home, the land itself is about 20 to 25% of the final sales price. Is that right?
I believe that's right.
Yeah, and it can be as high as 35, right, in some areas in Texas, to the point.
And so I think it's fair to say, the state's done a lot of good work, particularly of late, kind of rolling back some of the over-regulation that exists. But of course, that same characterization may not apply to other levels of government. I wonder if we might just, briefly look at some of the federal actions that have been put into place. And Ron, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You've got both executive orders being issued as well as possible legislation moving through Congress, assuming they still pass bills. What do you see at the federal level being advanced?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of good momentum at the federal level. The House passed a housing bill. Overwhelmingly. It was focused on two things that we've talked about a lot today, right? That is supply, and that is regulation. And the federal government incentivizing, right, both at a state level and to a degree at a local level, to the extent possible, to allow more supply, number one. Number two, it also was providing incentives, and as Senator Hughes mentioned, right, that access to credit. There's now an executive order related to that, which are the two keys, right, to solving this crisis. Now, the Senate had a bill also that ultimately came out for discussion and passed that had Section 901 in it, which was authored by the staff of Ms. Warren, and it effectively bans institutional investors from home ownership. That is significant. And I don't say that because I'm in that business, okay? I say that because you can't, private capital, regardless of the source, cannot make investments, and this is not Wall Street. When I say private investment, it's state pension funds, right? It's endowments in this country. It's providing housing. Private capital supplies most of the multifamily and a lot of the single family in this country from a capital perspective. If you are an investor and you're told that at the end of 7 years, right, you have to get rid of your single family or your rental, whatever it is, how likely would it be that you would invest in that? Somebody's dictating, right, what your profit's going to be. So at the core of it, right, that particular section is very disturbing. But I think that as the House gets involved, right, and others from our state specifically, I think we will wind up in an okay place, but it's a little disturbing. I mean, Senator Hughes talked about our state and how we're relaxing regulations that need to be relaxed and also addressing, right, specific laws with regards to how you go about doing business. And we need to stay focused on that. And I'll give you an example, right? Like over the last 40 years, okay, over 37.5% of Texans are renters. Today, 85% of the people in our portfolio cannot afford a mortgage. 1 in 5, 20% of those people have applied multiple times and could not get a mortgage. So there is a whole set of the population. We need to provide housing to folks in neighborhoods with schools for their kids that may not be able to afford that house, that are good people. They're firefighters, they're social workers, they're nurses. And here's the reason why, is because there's a ton of research on that if their kids grow up in a neighborhood that they couldn't otherwise afford and they go to their schools, guess what? Those kids are much more likely to become homeowners. And so those are the things that are important at a federal level, at a state level, and a local level.
And of course, at the federal level, President Trump also issued an executive order against institutional ownership of single-family homes, which is going through the process now. And of course, Ron and I differ slightly over this, but he's right about how the system works. You guys remember with the institutional ownership question, after my goodness, a few years ago, numbers appeared to be spiking. It looked a few years ago like there was a big increase in institutional investors. It was kind of funny. People were blaming BlackRock, and I love blaming BlackRock for stuff because it's usually true. It was actually Blackstone. That's right. Well, not yet. It's their style, but anyway. But that's right. And so groups like that were buying up single-family homes at pretty remarkable numbers, and was happening all at once. It got people's attention. We introduced legislation asking the Texas Real Estate Center to look at those numbers and see what the issue's like in Texas. Again, we're not talking about the rental property that you own or mom and pop. We're talking about large institutional investors that own a lot of single-family homes. Clearly, when they purchased those homes, other people, were competing to purchase those homes. So there was a big spike in institutional ownership. It kind of raised some eyebrows. And so we looked at the numbers. Since interest rates have come down, those numbers have leveled off a little bit. But still, and as you know, nationwide, it's maybe a couple of percent of single-family homes that are owned by large institutional investors. But that's nationwide. You look at individual communities, DFW area has a much higher number than the rest of the country. One of the reasons that Vice President Vance has been so hot on this issue against institutional ownership at a large scale is because in Ohio, there are huge swaths where a big percentage of the homes are owned by institutional investors. Now, we're not demonizing anybody, and we're not going to pass a law saying that you can't sell your house to whoever you want to. But we have to acknowledge that it is a factor, at least at the margin. If a young couple wants to buy that house and they're competing with an institutional investor, that's going to affect their ability to buy that house. So, is institutional investor ownership the problem? No. Is it part of the problem? I believe it is. But again, we're not going to pass a law in Texas saying you can't sell your house to whoever you want to. But we have to acknowledge, and again, who do we want to be? Who do we want to be? For 100 years, in this country, our income tax policy said what? We're going to let you deduct your home mortgage interest, not your credit card interest, which everybody has now, not your interest on your student loans or on your, student loans some, but not on your credit cards. But we've said home ownership is so important to who we are as Americans, not just our emotions, but the fact that that is how most of us are going to accumulate wealth and pass it on to that next generation. That's how we do it for years and years and years. It's who we are, and I refuse to accept that that's not the way it's going to be in America. We have to put policies in place so that the American dream of home ownership is a reality for Texans.
Totally agree. But I don't think, I think federal monetary and fiscal policy is what's driven that issue, not the people that own institutional homes. In 2024, the fact of the matter is we lost 98% of the bids that we made. We paid on average 88% of asking price for a house. Retail buyers would pay much more than that. You can go look at the stats. So there's a lot of headlines in the world we live in that are not accurate. And this is one of them, in my opinion. And I'm going to give you a little background. I grew up in South Texas, okay? Neither one of my parents had a college education. The reason I got to go to college is because my parents started buying, they owned small businesses in South Texas. They started buying rental homes and rented them, and that's the reason that I got to go to a major university. That was 50 years ago. You want to know the only thing that I remember about those houses specifically are the renters. And 50 years ago, there were people, and you can look at the statistics, across this country, historically, 33%. And listen, I'm all for home ownership. But the reality of it is 33% of these people in this country have either chosen not to be a homeowner or cannot afford to. The only thing I remember about our renters is they were so happy that they could live in the community that they lived in and send their kids to the school they could send to. The average, my mom, we own 12, my mom owns 6 today. 3 of those 6 have been in those homes for over 10 years. That's a renter by choice, okay? And I'm not saying that everybody doesn't have the American dream, but the reality on the ground is different. And we need to supply housing across the board. We own a modular factory in Cuero, Texas, that provides modular housing in half the time. Thanks to Nicole's effort here locally, we can build 4-bedroom, 3-bath detached. We can be 3-2. We can build townhomes. We're delivering them to Austin, Texas, thanks to the work that's been done here. We have to be inclusive with regards to, you're not going to solve this housing crisis without attacking it from every angle and knowing the history and the culture of our country. And I completely agree. Our founder lived in rental housing all of his life. So we are passionate about what we do. And we care about our renters. And we know them very, very well. And they're hardworking people that want to live in a good neighborhood with good schools and be safe for their kids. That's it.
Well said, Ron. I want to move to the local policymaking space just a little bit. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up Austin, not in a negative way, but actually, I believe we are moving in a better direction, right? And I actually credit some of the progress to legislative initiatives because, at least from my vantage point, it appears that the city recognizes, hey, the state is either going to do this thing or it's entertaining the idea of doing this thing before they do it. It's probably better that we do it so that we get a little bit more say over the process. And I wonder, Nicole, if you would agree with that sentiment and if you see it happening elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that that's 100% accurate. And we've seen some amazing movement in Dallas too. There are these very interesting, and I feel like as soon as you say building codes, people start snoring and falling asleep. But stick with me here. there's something called International Building Code. And this is what you have to build an airport with. This is what you have to build huge structures with, maybe a hotel. And it turns out across most of Texas, this is what you have to build a triplex with. This is what you have to build maybe a small apartment home building with 4 units with. And what we've seen is there's been studies from places like Nashville that have showed that when you use things like International Building Code, which is the really expensive one where you have to have contractors who have like $10 million, $20 million worth of insurance, versus using International Residential Code, which is what single family homes are built with, it adds a huge cost. And so there was another study in Denton that showed that it actually increased the cost within Denton, whether you use International Building Code versus International Residential Code, by 55%. These are things like, are you going to use a firewall, which would constrain fires for several hours? Every firefighter is supposed to be able to get to any home within Texas within 3 hours. So a firewall is much cheaper. Or are you going to force folks to install sprinkler systems? So it's not a question of, are we going to be safe with fire? There are many cheap technologies to make sure that we're safe with fire. It's a question of how are we going to be safe with fires? I asked somebody, so who's pushing to make sure that it's International Building Code? The response I got was, it's probably the sprinkler lobby. So there's certain things when there's like only one moneyed interest on the side of it, you kind of got to take a step back and wonder, well, you know, there's multiple ways to economically and to through the market solve things. Somebody shouldn't have carte blanche over something and add all of that expense onto struggling young people, struggling young families. So Dallas has incorporated this code to switch from International Building Code to International Residential Code for 6 units and under. I think we need to take Dallas's model and do it all across the state. And there's been some other things like, and actually this is the interesting interplay between the state and localities. Austin was trying to allow more missing middle products onto their market in 2019. And I actually thought I was just going to be a volunteer. Maybe I went and I testified a few times. And that fell flat on its face. There were 30 homeowners, I might add, who sued the entire city of Austin from allowing things like townhomes, row homes, certain kind of products that a lot of young people in this room would probably be able to afford to purchase some of these missing middle products rather than renting for another 1 or 2 decades. And so when that happened, they actually used this obscure law called the Valid Petition Law. We ended up calling it the Tyrant's Veto. And once again, you're going to get bored of me saying Senator Hughes passed this law too. And I mean this in a great way. This is one of the major laws that totally revamped land use code and allowed people to use majority, or to not allow a tyrannical minority within a neighborhood to stop things like a townhome from coming up. Or if somebody wanted a little bit of a bigger accessory dwelling unit, or to add a 3rd story for their mother-in-law instead of having them go to a senior home that they couldn't afford. Now, instead of just having 20% of local property owners say, no, we don't want you to do that, we expanded it to 60% thanks to Senator Hughes. So all of these, the interplay of city and state has been huge, and we've seen some very positive steps forward. I don't want to take up too much time, but the last thing I'll mention is another compatibility bill, which was something that the state legislature took on. It got very close to passing, and then City of Austin picked it back up because I think it was a mix of the prices had gotten so high in Austin that enough families, young families, recent college students said enough is enough. We need to stand up and allow market forces to allow young people to actually have a shot at this American dream of home ownership. So a lot of these were, I would almost say the trace comes from a mix of both state and city interacting with each other.
Well, Thank you for those thoughts, and TPPF looks forward to joining alongside you to fight Big Sprinkler. And I want to go to Q&A in just a minute, but I wonder, Chairman Ron, if you guys might share maybe an idea or two about what possible future changes you might be looking at in the 2027 legislative session.
Thank you so much. On the local permitting process, we talk to folks who build houses, folks who develop property, and tell us about choke points they run into. And again, let's don't talk about the city of Austin. They're doing a lot of good work on making it easier for folks to live here. Let's talk about cities writ large, and I could fill in the blank. They're playing games. So they say, oh, I'm sorry, your application's not complete. We need this form. You need to start over. Or you get your inspection and you get everything done and you're ready for your certificate of occupancy, but it takes a while for the electric company to come out. And so since they didn't come within 7 days, you got to start over and get another inspection, hire another electrician, another plumber. Real dollars that add costs to homes and price real families out of the market. So as we listen to folks who are in the real world doing this, we'll be back next session with more specific laws aimed at cities that are abusing their authority and they're abusing their residents. And you know what? Their residents are my residents too, and we're going to take care of them, aren't we? We're not going to let a few cities keep people priced out of the housing market. That's going to be a big deal. We always get fresh ideas with backup and numbers and support from Nicole and her group. So I'm going to see what else she gives me. She gives me the ball, and then she has all the people blocked, and I just get to walk across the line. It's a blessing. And again, and Ron and I were talking about this at the federal level. They have got to move quickly on easing up a little bit. So before 2008, the banks were throwing money at people. They were giving people loans they couldn't afford. That plus mortgage-backed securities led to the housing crisis. I get it, but the feds tend to go from one ditch to the other, don't they? They lurch from over there to giving everybody money, and now they give nobody money. What's the old joke? The bank won't loan you money unless you don't need it. You know what I'm talking about? That's where the feds have forced banks. And I'm not an apologist for banks, but the feds have forced banks into that situation on mortgages. These new rules coming out are going to help. We have to open this up. Listen, we're thankful for all forms. My goodness, we know about renting and renting for a long time. We were renters when I was growing up, and we loved our landlady next door, neat lady. And she was a friend. She used to babysit me when my mother and grandmother were working. And we recognize those relationships, and we recognize that owning a home is not the best fit for everyone. But we reject that the American dream of homeownership is going to be forever out of reach. We got to keep it in reach and make it even more of a reality.
Thank you, Chairman. Ron,
Agree with that.
Ron, are there any changes that you're hopeful for?
I mean, I think when you look at the landscape, I mean, I think tax relief, right, which I know is being discussed. I mean, in our rental homes, we own a little over 5,000 rental homes in Texas. About 15% of that gross revenue is taxes. And I think there are some creative ways to address it, right? Like, homestead type exemption for rental, right? You're providing houses to people that really need it. And then the other thing that I don't think is really obvious from non-real estate perspective, but we've got to limit just the uplift in appraised values. Okay, and I'll give you an example literally from this week. And everybody in here that owns a home or pays rent, like rent is a product of two things, right? Your base rent and then taxes. And then like if you don't have office space or something, other operating expenses. But taxes are passed through 100%, okay? Housing appreciation in the state of Texas last year was 5 to 6% appreciation, okay? Today, it's 0 to 4, will probably end up 1 to 2% higher. Article in the Dallas Morning News earlier this week. There were 7 cities in the greater Dallas-Fort Worth that had assessments on average that came out over 9% higher. The highest one was Wilmer, Texas. Their tax, okay, assessments went up on average 32.9%. Okay, so let's take this. Okay? You rent a house. We don't raise the rent on you at all. You get your tax bill, you gotta recover it. There you go. Right? Like there were 9 cities that were over 6%. We all know that housing valuations, right? And again, to y'all's point, appraisers are taking housing and kind of treating it like commercial. It's not. Okay? People pay those taxes, not corporations, right? And renters don't get to deduct it, right? So it's a pure expense to them. You own a house, you get to deduct, just like Senator Hughes said, you get to deduct your mortgages, you also get to deduct your taxes. So I think those two things would be the largest impact, both on ownership and rental, to be honest.
That's terrific. I could probably talk taxes with you all day, but I do want to go to audience Q&A now. Before we do, though, I want to actually extend that privilege to a special guest we have as part of our new influencer experience at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And I want to extend that person the privilege of asking the first question. So with us today is Armando Nava, and you can find him on Instagram as well as other social media channels that I have aged out of. But thank you for being here, and we'll take the first question. We've got the microphone coming.
Hi, my name's Jeb Baugh. I make Instagram videos online. I'm a college student. Senator, the data shows that in 1970, Texas home cost about 1.3 the average annual income, but today it's nearly 4 times that. Boomers seems like they built wealth on home prices that were actually attainable. How would you address, young people wanting to own homes, and what's your biggest thing that you think is going to fix that?
Man, thank you so much. It's probably the biggest problem we face. In America, we've always believed that we can do better than our parents did. We can succeed, and our children will do better than us. And we don't have to give up on that. That can still be real. Part of it is making sure that cities are not raising the cost of home ownership. Part of it is dealing with those property taxes. And with changes to the homestead exemption, with a couple more sessions, we will have the homestead exemption high enough, $250,000, $300,000. That means on the first $300,000 of your home, you don't pay any school property tax. That gets first-time home buyers into homes. We have to do that. If we don't stay ahead of this, it's going to get even worse. You nailed the problem, and we have to fix it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Can we go to Lisa?
Thank you. Thank you for all your work that you're doing on this. We talk a lot about the families that are being priced out of buying homes. I deal in the population of not just working poor, but extremely working poor that are priced out of renting an apartment. And I'll house them for a few weeks until we can get them into stable housing. What is being done for this population? Is there anything at this point? Frequently, one of my families will have a housing voucher, and they think they won the lottery, and they've got 60 days to find an apartment, and they go from place to place to place, and nobody will take their voucher, and it expires, so they're back living on their friend's floor. And so I think over the last decade, things have changed. Apartments used to take these vouchers, and now apartments are part of national chains, and they have policies that, hey, there's enough renters out there, we don't need to take the vouchers anymore. So anything in the Texas ledge that's happening?
Thank you for helping those people. Those are real people, our neighbors, our friends, our family, some of us at different times in our lives. Thank you. I'll say this, and Nicole mentioned this. One thing that is making a difference, we talked about Senate Bill 840 that makes it easier to convert existing space that's currently commercial, retail, converting that to housing. As Nicole said, of the thousands of units that have already been added, those were below market, so that helps. So we're adding the supply of lower than the current market rental. So that's helping. But I would say my initial response would be more of that, more supply is going to bring those rents down for everybody, specifically targeting that community. I didn't know that about the vouchers. I'm familiar with that system. I didn't know that apartments weren't taking them, and I don't know how that works. To the extent that it's a state thing, let's figure out why they're not taking them, and I'm not saying we compel them to take them, but let's fix the problem so that voucher is just like $1, so they'll take them. And as you know, he talked about living in good neighborhoods. My friend is right about that. It's always a dilemma, right, when we talk about folks who need housing, because some folks say, yeah, I like my neighborhood like it is. I don't want folks coming in, maybe that are different from me or different demographics. But one thing we've recognized is when we can take someone who's having a hard time, maybe they've struggled, and put them in a neighborhood with folks who are a little further down the road, who are successful and can help them, and they can learn from each other, everybody wins. So we can't let that get in the way.
Could you mind if I chime
Please,
in?
please.
I'm so sorry, Ron. I want to echo what Senator Hughes said. There's a really interesting study that, and I'll tell you, I've heard so much opposition. Oh, if you build housing, it's not going to necessarily help middle-class folks or low-income folks. There's a fascinating study in San Francisco where they built a 200-unit apartment building in San Francisco, a lower-income part of San Francisco. And what they found was immediately after that was up and operational and they were renting those out, the surrounding rents dropped 6%. This is a study by MIT researcher Evan Mass. They also showed that when you build existing market rate housing, you reduce the chance that someone's going to get displaced by 17%. So you just take a look at San Francisco. I mean, even if you're middle class, it feels like you're getting displaced. Nevertheless, if you're lower income. But on another level, I'd love to shout out to our partners at Institute for Justice and Pew Trust. There's a really brilliant researcher over there named Alex Horowitz. Anybody who's really interested in the data behind this, I recommend they Google Alex Horowitz, Pew Trust. He puts out such fascinating and accessible data on this topic. And he pointed out, he started out with the question, why was it that prior to the 1970s, it doesn't seem like homelessness really existed to the level that it does today? And his main thing that he is pushing alongside with Institute for Justice is single rate occupancy homes. And so this is something that might look a little bit like a smaller hotel. And basically these existed in almost every city where maybe you weren't making enough to even afford a market rate apartment, but you could afford maybe a $300 a month single rate occupancy building. And this building could be built such that, sure, everybody shares one big bathroom with a shower, but it's economically feasible for your lowest income person. Now, in the 1970s, a lot of these were made illegal. And then people wonder and complain why certain people are sleeping in their cars or sleeping on the sidewalks. Well, look at our policies. It's the barriers that prevent the market from addressing this issue. And so I think that the single rate occupancy issue will be brought in the next legislative session, and there's already sort of a coalition between Pew Trust and Institute for Justice around that. I think y'all are getting involved in that too, or maybe
Surprise.
Yeah,
Now you are.
Yeah, there we go.
Ron.
I want to address what's changed in both the multifamily world and the SFR world is you have a lot, not necessarily in SFR, but to some degree, you have public REITs that now own a lot of multifamily. And that's where this has originated because they were the ones that started it. And then you had some in the private sector follow on their coattails so they wouldn't be blamed, but like the big public REITs are doing it, so why can't we do it? 8 to 10% of our portfolio is voucher residents, so I'm happy to connect you with our team, and hopefully we can help house. We're privately owned, and we're proud of it, and like I said, happy to try to help you in that regard.
Yes, in the back.
Yeah, so are you guys familiar with the International Energy Conservation Code? This is a code that evidently gets updated every few years that is largely based off of trying to push back on climate problems. But these are building codes that a committee is making the decisions on, updating things both in the commercial side and on the residential side that are adding cost to construction. And so my question to you is this was brought by some of my constituents, and so we're looking into it. My hope is that maybe we can look and figure out how legislatively we go in and any of them that are really unnecessary, that are driving up the cost, that we can, bring legislation to try and get that corrected.
Senator, I'll sign on to your bill. Thank you so much. And everybody, you know, I just do what he did. You know, Senator Sparks, isn't that kind of what we see? Let's assume that those people in Brussels or wherever that make up those rules, let's assume, give them the benefit of that their motives are the best. They really want to help people. And just like the people who are against affordable power or against oil and gas, they claim, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They really want to help people. They want to help working folks. But their policies hurt everybody, and they hurt working folks the most. It's horrible. And yes, thank you. Sign me up. Let's get rid of that.
Ross, let's go to the Roger.
So, Senator Hughes, this is for you. You were talking about your great bill to allow multifamily by right in commercial, and I know that some of the cities have been pushing back on this a little bit by doing things like minimum height limits and things like that. So I'm curious as to what the plans are next session to try to tighten some of that up so that the cities can't thwart what you've done.
Thank you so much. And Nicole will correct me if I get the details wrong, but we saw one objection to this bill. A city didn't want to go along with it, and they said, okay, how about this? They said, okay, the legislature says we have to let you build, so you can build an apartment here, but you have to have, what was it, yoga classes, and I'm not making this up. What were they?
Olympic-sized pool,
Yeah.
dog saunas, regular saunas, art projects, one of which was $5 million art projects. Yoga studios. It was insane.
I forgot about the dog sauna. I thought so next, so we're learning, we're seeing what the workarounds are, what the cheating looks like. I'll just be very direct. And yes, sir, you'll see legislation pre-filed before January to deal with that. Thank you.
Yes, right in the back.
Hi, I'm Derek Wilson. I'm the chair of the Texas Young Republican Federation. Senator, you and I have talked several times about housing policy, and I really appreciate your work on this. I want to start by saying thank you for the work on the homestead exemptions. Personally, as a homeowner, I have seen that impact on my property taxes, and that has helped my family.
Good.
So thank you for that. But in talking with other YRs who are fortunate enough to have homes, one of the other issues that we're seeing now is that like all those savings we're getting are getting eaten by our insurance increasing by 3-4 times. Is there any discussion happening in regards to that?
It's a tremendous issue. Homeowners insurance in Texas, you've seen, especially if you live in a rural area or if you live, sometimes certain neighborhoods are more affected. They're going through the roof. Now, many times when insurance goes up, people look at claims, look at litigation. There's no litigation on homeowners policies. There's a problem. For one thing, there's not enough competition, right? Our rules are limiting the number of people that can sell homeowners insurance in Texas and limiting what products they can offer. Some of that's changing. Some of that's getting loosened up. That's going to help. But it's a huge problem. And so the Business and Commerce Committee is looking at that over the interim. I believe the House is looking at it as well. But we're all dealing with this, right? It's crazy what homeowners insurance is doing. And again, we want to give people flexibility. You ought to be able to buy the creme de la creme, all the bells and whistles. I know that's a mixed metaphor, but you ought to be able to buy the best HOA policy you want. You should also be able to buy something less than that you can afford just so it takes care of your needs. Since we have to loosen that up. If we have more competition, those prices will come down. We also have to look at those companies. These are regulated companies operating on a state license and make sure they're following the rules and making sure they're not cheating people. Hard to believe an insurance company would take advantage of people. But just in case, yes, I'm being sarcastic. So we're going to look at that between now and January.
We've got time for probably about 2 more questions. If we go to this gentleman in the back and then this patient gentleman right in the middle. Gotcha.
Thank you. I don't mean to be sarcastic, but it seems to me that everybody up there has somebody else to blame. For example, you said lack of availability. Well, now you're blaming the builders. You have lack of credit. Well, now you're blaming the financial companies. Now you're saying you're tightening up the rules preventing access. That's the local government. That's the board of directors of the of the county, the city, or whatever the municipality is, you're blaming them from not setting up the rules correctly. Okay, so now you're saying preventing insurance. Okay, now you want the insurance companies to lower their prices. Well, their prices are going up for a reason. Either they're greedy, but you all are giving them the licenses. You all are approving them. So, I mean, everybody up there has a reason. It's the other guy's fault. And the real problem is if it's availability, it's because the price of lumber's up, the price of labor's up, the price of plumbing's up, or what is it? Why? Because there's a lot of people in this state that like to build homes from as long as I've been living here. But why is it that the lack of availability? Is it because they can't afford to build them or because nobody can afford to buy them? So somehow you guys got to get together and organize how you're going to blame this on somebody and or fix the problem universally, not one guy here and one problem there. You've got to fix the whole problem.
I think we've all said it's largely a government problem. I'm from the government, okay? That's why I'm here. I think we've all said it's, and by the way, you weren't being sarcastic. I was right before you. You were very polite, but it's a government problem. It's a local government problem on zoning, on silly rules and regulations. It could be an insurance company problem, and yes, we do license them, and that's why we're looking at them right now to make sure that there's not something improper going on. You bet it's not the builder's fault. We want to make it easier for them to build more houses. We want more houses, more supply.
May I just chime in? I'm a big data person, and I agree with what Senator Hughes said. I think when you get into more regulated markets, unfortunately, it's not a one fix issue, because now you're adding in all these other artificial barriers that have been constrained over decades. But if I had to choose one thing, because I think you ask a really important question, you take a look at somewhere, because some people say, oh, it's the interest rate. Some people say, oh, it's the labor. You take a look at 2022 and you take a look at 2023. You look at Austin and San Francisco, two extremes of both ends. Even Austin, there's a legislator who got emailed over, when he was building an apartment building, it was over $1 million worth of fees to build an apartment building here in Austin. I mean, fees are almost like a direct tax on the person who owns the building as well as the person who ends up moving in. Then that same building in Dallas cost 10x less for those fees. So obviously, City of Austin has a fee problem. But what was fascinating to me was the same national interest rate. You look at compare San Francisco, you compare Austin. In 2022, there was issued in Austin about 180 permits in 2022. Then you look at 2023, it was about 140. Then you compare that to San Francisco in 2023, 14 permits were issued in that year. So point being is, yes, there are, all of these things are death by 1,000 cuts, but I think some of the cuts are the worst. And I think that zoning and over-regulation from the local governments can be the worst, and those rules are so important. And I think TPPF has done a good job at making sure that the cities stay honest with not going overboard on some of these local laws. But I love comparing that Austin and San Francisco chart that Alex Horowitz from Pew Trust put together, because it really shows same interest rate, same things that they're facing nationally on those pressures, and yet you see that the lack of supply has led to $1.3 million median home prices in San Francisco, and we see Austin is the city that's dropping the most in prices. So I think supply in the past, and I'm going to shut up, I promise you here. I think supply is the biggest thing. Whatever we can do to bring on more supply. From 2015 to 2023, City of Austin has added 30% of supply to their housing stock. And that has shown in the way that the prices have gone down. Meanwhile, you look at places like, you combine the Bay Area, you combine Oakland, and you combine Sausalito to see how many homes they're all building. Houston is still building more than all of those three major cities in the Bay Area. And those prices reflect that. It is insane to buy homes in those counties because they don't build enough homes, so you have fewer people competing over just a few homes. And like musical chairs, the cost ends up getting driven up to $1.3 million median home prices.
We've got time for one last question in the back, if we would.
Roy or Ron, you said availability to credit. So that's the business I'm in, is credit for home financing. Give you the scenario and let me know and expand on what you mean by that, because I don't understand when you say that it's not available. Got a client, a few different clients, but give you this perspective and let me see if you can clarify. A waitress, $30,000 a year, able to afford and closing tomorrow $190,000, new build home, no issue, makes $30,000 a year. Have another client make $250 a year, barely able to afford a $390 house. Both of them available, 1-0 down, the other one's putting 10% down. So what is not available in the market for somebody to get financing?
Is your second house a new house?
No.
Okay, so here's what's going on. And it's what's buoyed the housing market, and it's a credit to the national builders and the large regionals. Your first example, they're getting a subsidized mortgage, okay, as a part of the transaction from the builder. Okay, that's ultimately a mortgage company behind it, but they're getting a subsidized mortgage. In other words, their interest rate is not 6.5 for the first 3 years. The builder has bought down that rate to 4. Okay.
No, that's not correct. 6%, and then one's at 6.5 because of credit, based on credit.
Okay.
So nobody's bought anything down, nothing's subsidized.
That is a very common thing that is going on today across all sectors of the housing market, right? And it's beneficial, honestly, right? Because it keeps new homes being built, and those builders are taking that hit, right? They're paying for that buy down.
Well,
Now, in your example, that wasn't the case, but that's the reason that I asked the question. There's 1,000 reasons, okay, why there could be a difference. Like each lender has different underwriting, right, that they do. And I will just tell you, okay, while we're on the subject, I don't care whether you're buying a $190,000 house or a $5 million house, okay? In the last 3 years post-COVID, the underwriting standards across the board have been tightened. Okay?
Disagree 100%.
And that's the fact. And that's what we at a state level, and more importantly, right, the most important executive order that's come out is that access, again, to credit. Like we all, and again, it's like Nicole said, and the gentleman asked, we're dealing, like this legislature, right, and Nicole, we're dealing with regulations that were established 2 decades ago. You can't unwind them all in one legislative session. You're trying, but like there's a lot, right? The credit standards were set by Dodd-Frank. That was after the greatest financial crisis in our lifetime. That's not the case today. We live in a much more liquid global environment than we did then. Do we need to have regulations around? Yes. But like, as Senator Hughes said, we swung from the left when there was a ton of fraud by intermediaries to the far right? We need to come back a little closer to the center, and that will help people afford to buy houses, and it will increase supply at a very basic level, in my opinion. Okay? One person's opinion, but I've been in the real estate business for over 30 years. Okay? I think that's the single largest way to solve our housing. And this is the reason I'll tell you. Okay? We're 4.5 million houses short on a national basis. Okay? Now, from 2011 to 2022, what was the 30-year mortgage rate? I can tell you, the lowest it was 3.15% in 2021. It never was higher than 4.7%. In my opinion, we will never get back there. So if we're 4.5 million houses short in the lowest cost of capital environment we've ever lived in, we better make some changes, because a normal environment, that 30-year mortgage is in the 5.5% to 6.5% range. And I don't know that we're going back.
I hate to interrupt a man making a great point, but we are over time. We're going to have to put a pin in this conversation and continue it either afterwards or perhaps at this time next year. In the meantime, please help me thank these fine folks for the time and expertise.